English translation 639th Contact Wednesday, the 23rd of December 2015, 21:54 hours.
Well, I have come at just the right time. Say hello together, and both of you be welcome.
I greet you too, Edward. I do so equally, so be greeted, and thank you for welcoming me. Ptah and I have agreed that first I will bring up my case, so that I can go my way again, because I have an appointment.
Of course, I am all for you. But look here in the computer, Ptah. In the meantime, when Quetzal speaks, you can read this letter that was sent to me the day before yesterday. It was stored in a pen drive, so I stored the contents in the computer. Bernadette, however, corrected the letter somewhat because it was grammatically and orthographically necessary. The writer was apparently not sufficiently competent in this regard.
I would like to do that because I see that the letter is addressed to you personally, apparently by someone who calls you Eddie and not Billy. So I read while Quetzal and you talked together.
Dear Eddie, I allow myself to write to you, and I believe that you remember me and know who I am. I want to say something clear about you for once. But the fact is that I have already died by the time you receive this letter that the son of a friend writes for me in the computer, word for word as I tell him. He will send you the letter with a so-called stick when the time comes. So please do not ask for me, because it would be pointless. All my life I have been careful not to come before your eyes, because I was so ashamed of the stupidity that I have done to you, and for which I am now absolved of guilt before I have to give up the spoon. I have known you almost all your life, and I have learned a lot from you and from everything you have written in your life. I have read all your books and everything else, and even studied what you have written. I was already an adult, I thought at that time, and you were still a boy of 11 when I met you, and you showed me that I was not yet an adult, which I could not cope with at that time. That's why I got so angry at that time and I met you so badly. I think you've forgotten everything, and I'm sure you've forgotten me. But I haven't forgotten you because, without you knowing it, you helped me a lot and helped me out of bad mistakes that burdened me for a long time and caused me a lot of damage. Then you went away and disappeared from my eyes, but then I turned to your dear mother to find out how you were and where you were. But I didn't dare to contact you because I did something against you that was wrong and hit you. And so it was that I only ever talked to your mother and learned from her where you had just been and what you had done in foreign countries. She also told me what you then built up from 1975 with the club, and that you still have contacts with people from a foreign world, as you already had when I knew you. It was a strange experience for me at the time, when I was allowed to see how you entered a strange plane and flew away. But you forbid me to tell other people what I have followed. But what your mother has told me about you in more than 6 decades, and what I also know about several people who are in your club and Hinterschmidruti, that is exactly what you already proved to me as a boy and helped me a lot. So today I am especially sorry that I did something wrong against you back then. I am now 91 years old and still able to get rid of and write to you what concerns me and tell you before I close my eyes forever. My life was good and fulfilled, which I owe to your books and my experiences with you in your youth. But unfortunately, my watch runs out soon because my time comes. Therefore, I want to say to you all my thanks, and also that you have been a kind person since your youth, and very tolerant to other people, but also honest to them. I may still remember how, when you were under high pressure and you were upset, you slowed down your breath and then loudly said your opinion, but without getting upset. I tried that too, but I never managed it because I always got excited when I got loud. And you already had a longing at that time to go on journeys, and you then already moved out into the world in your youth. For you, you already told me back then, the key to a happy life is the balance of thoughts and feelings, because only then can a balanced and positive state of the psyche be. That made a very big impression on me, and for a long time I could not understand how you as a boy could think and say something like that. Only later, When I realized that you had already adapted your life to life at a young age and were kind-hearted, somehow intellectual, charitable, independent, and helpful at a young age, could I understand that you wanted to help me grow up? Today I know, because I learned so much about you from your dear mother and from people who come to you, that you never collapsed despite many difficult experiences, and also under heavy pressure, etc., and always remained faithful to yourself with a strong will. You are a natural leader, love to take responsibility, and must always have a goal with a purpose. You already had great courage and a will to assert yourself when I met you. I could never forget that and therefore tried to emulate you. Unfortunately, I was never as flexible as you, which is why I could never adapt as you could. Even then, you were a leader who could teach and lead people, because you were always confident, adventurous, and determined and enterprising. You were also never arrogant, but rather warm-hearted and a charmer. But you could be quite emotional if you wanted to make big decisions or explain something to me that I just didn't want to understand. And that was the very thing that didn't fit into my collar, and I had rebelled against it, which I regretted later when I realized that you were like that, and that it was good that you were so emotional when I didn't want to understand what you explained to me. I still hear your voice today when you have become loud, but unfortunately it was only in later years that I realized that you had only become loud because you were right about what you energetically explained. When I realized this in the course of my life, I suddenly knew that you had pressed the starter for me, that I had begun to need my thoughts so that I could direct them, as I could then do with my feelings. Through you, I learned that I could get excited about not just letting myself drift, as I did when I thought I was grown up and can now do and leave what I want. I have also learned from you to absorb many new things, and that you have taken great burdens off my shoulders by doing this when you trimmed me when I was a boy, when I thought I was grown up. I thank you for that. At that time, I did not accept it from you, but became angry against you, because only in the course of the years did I learn what you actually taught me, that I could have a good life and assert myself in all things without being further aggressive. I learned a lot from you what I could use in life, also that I could keep my feelings in check, not to be too sensitive. I also learned from you to be a compassionate person, as you are yourself, which I understood later when I lost sight of you. For without you having compassion for me, it would certainly not have been possible for you to know me better than I know myself. But I did not realize that until much later. Now, may I tell you that I felt connected to you all my life, and that I apologize for what I did wrong against you then. I know that as a sensitive, compassionate person, you will forgive me if I can leave the world calmly. I trust in you. As a sensitive person, you take care that I do not have to be afraid, because as I know you, you will accept my apology without hesitation. I thank you for everything you have done for me, even if you do not know how much it really is, and that you have made my whole life a joy. Vincent.
As Florina told you today,
Yes, I know. I am sorry to interrupt. This lunchtime, Bernadette and I sat in the kitchen and talked when we heard noises that sounded as if they were coming from the hallway, so I took a quick look but didn't see anyone. Back in the kitchen, Bernadette and I continued talking as we heard the sounds again. Bernadette said that perhaps Cuneo was tampering with something in the visitor's room corridor, which is why I rose again and looked around. But I noticed that neither Cuneo nor anyone else was outside. So I went back to the kitchen where Bernadette was waiting and we kept talking. Then the noises sounded again, and Bernadette said that perhaps one of you would look for me personally instead of calling me telepathically as usual. So she stood up when the noises repeated themselves again, went to the kitchen door, and said that I should have a look in the living room because someone might be waiting for me there. And since I had looked after the first noises in the hallway, but not in the living room, I went in, and Florina waited for me and explained that you, Quetzal, would come here during the evening or night. But then she left again, which I told Bernadette, who was now tampering with the washing machine in the stable aisle. She joked that Florina could have just walked into the kitchen and immediately said that it wouldn't have been good, because then she, Bernadette, would have fallen off the chair.
I know that because Florina told me that she had called you, but that you were so absorbed in the conversation with Bernadette that you could not hear her calling, which is why she made herself felt in the living room. And if Bernadette had fallen from her chair, well, that would have been a special, but for her unpleasant spectacle.
You may be right about that. Then it was like Florina called me and I didn't notice it. But good, then that's settled. What do you have to report now, my friend?
As Ptah has told you, I have made forward-looking observations and have found that the whole thing will remain in about the same framework as I explained to you during my last visit. But what I now have to explain should not appear openly in the discussion report, as was the case with my first explanations. And what I want to mention about the vigil exercise, the night watchmen, as well as the controllers until midnight, should be equipped with strong lights and illuminate the dark corners and places well. However, it should not be the case that the luminaires should be switched on continuously, but should only be used to illuminate corners and dark areas. The whole of the night watch rule will not be concealable to the outside world, not only because certain group members cannot be silent, but also because your activities from the outside are not only observed, but also spied on, because it is hoped that you would do things that could be used to harm you, the group members, and the association FIGU. Unfortunately, there are many envious people in the vicinity and further away who do not like the fact that the mission is bearing good fruit worldwide, and that the center and its grounds have become a little paradise of blossoming and beauty, as well as peace and tranquility. Now, however, with regard to my forward-looking observations, I have to say that of course I was not able to continuously research through all the times of all nights from evening to morning, because such forward-looking observations and controls are extremely labor-intensive in many respects. For the next 3 years, however, I was able to clarify a few things that were satisfactory, and I came to the same conclusion as with my first statements. And as I have observed with an eye to the future, these controls really do need to be carried out, and they need to be carried out in an orderly manner, so that they can be taken seriously and not simply laxly, carelessly, and inattentively. Throughout all these times, I have observed that between evening and midnight, even into the first 2 hours of the morning, strangers appear around the center, right up to the buildings. As I mentioned earlier, I also found out that there was not only curiosity behind it, but also envy. Among these strangers, who not only for some time, but sporadically also in the future appear, as I could observe, there are often also religiously sectarian aberrations, as well as others, who intentionally and for wantonly mutual motives, but also for various other low motives, are willing to do all sorts of damage.
And that's all there is to say and explain?
There is no need for further explanation, because what I have said are the necessary facts to be mentioned.
And you can rely on that?
Exceptions can of course always appear, but I could not take them into account in my observations, so you yourself have to be concerned about your comprehensive safety with sporadic and intermediate controls, which I consider necessary.
That's for sure.
Then I want to go back now and say goodbye to you. But be guided by my knowledge, for it is necessary. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Also goodbye, and thank you for your efforts.
It was my need. Goodbye, my friend.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. I'll take care of it.
He really tried hard.
I don't doubt that. But what I want to say, yesterday, the 23rd of December, a bee sat on the hood of the car in Dusnang when we were filling up with gasoline. The astonishing thing about it was that the insect, probably due to the climate change effect, was not lax, but lively and had large pollen packets on its hind legs, which I suspect were from the flowering hazel bushes, which are all around in various places.
Climate change is progressing inexorably, and so are the changes in the plant world, as well as the behavior of all fauna, animals, birds, and insects, etc., which adapt their typical periodic habits and rules of life to the new climatic conditions.
That is clear to me. Therefore, many moths, isolated flies, and wasps, and many different mosquitoes cavort around our house, mainly tiger mosquitoes. But what's your opinion on the letter? Bernadette told me to publish it in a special bulletin because it was remarkable.
He's actually very remarkable, and I think she's right about publishing him. But I want to say that I am aware of the incidents between you and this Vincent, because my father made records of them and meticulously recorded them in writing. But if I may now digress from this letter, in which you are rightly mentioned as a man of integrity by a deceased person, then I want to speak of something that you never mention, but which I am well aware of through our control records and which has occupied me for years. For many years now, you have been working for several people with regard to their budget regulations and maintenance. You have freed them all from debts, and you regulate their financial budgets month after month together with them, etc., and you do all this free of charge, and you don't thank anyone for it. I always thought that you would talk to me about this, but this has not been the case so far, which is why I would like to raise my voice in this matter myself, with regard to the incident with the person. So I want to say that I find it very regrettable and that it hurts me that you have been insulted, accused and even slandered by this person for some years now in such a way that you want to bind them to yourself, as well as to the Figu through your helpfulness. This is very unfortunate because for years you have been selflessly assisting and helping this person in every possible way. Because she is dissatisfied through and through her life and not in control, but also because she cannot cope with her financial budget. So, as I know, you are helping her especially in these relationships, free of charge and helpful. You have freed her from her financial difficulties, so also that she became debt-free as you did many years ago, but nothing was learned from it. You have also been and continue to be helpful with your present help for years, and have once again achieved debt relief for the person, whereby, through your efforts, this level of debt relief is maintained. You have been working with this person again for several years to regulate her budget month after month, because she is incapable of this herself, and would quickly incur debts again if she were to handle the whole thing on her own again. Through your kindness and help, she has now even been able to accumulate some savings on a bank as assets, which would not have been possible through her own actions, because she is simply unable to handle and administer her financial resources herself. And what I further understand as very malicious is the fact that the same person has dared to accuse you of everything for years, in the way that your contacts with us as well as our common conversations would not correspond to the truth, but only to a work of lies. And that is unfortunately the case in this case, as I mentioned on the 8th of December with regard to the two remaining weaknesses. What is offered to you as ingratitude and sneaky insult for your honest helpfulness and love as well as for all your expenditures, I feel as a shamefulness and unparalleled ingratitude which all in all cannot be expressed in words.
You know, dear friend, with us there are the proverbs. Nothing is so hard as man's ingratitude, and fools and dummies cannot know the truth. And that this person insults me behind my back and expresses his slander. I know that very well, but I do not care about it, nor do I stop my help, because I cannot and must not simply let the person degenerate. But you know, I'm very sorry that you feel everything so deeply and that it causes you pain. I'm so sorry for all this for you.
You are exploited and betrayed, dear friend, and besides, your helpfulness is not estimated by the person concerned, in contrast to the others whom you also look after, and who have also been able to invest some savings and are very grateful to you for all your help, as I know. But your words speak for you and show that you...
Please, that's enough. I don't need thanks, praise or reward for my actions. because what I do is self-evident to me, and it is my duty to my fellow human beings, and I don't think that needs to be specifically mentioned or justified in any way.
Of course, excuse me, but I feel so helpless about what's done to you in injustice.
You mustn't get excited or tortured. Let us therefore talk about something else, because today I have the following subject that I want to address. If everything is looked at closely in every respect of all earthly humanity, then a culture of human depravity that spans humanity can be recognized, which is promoted by many irresponsible military, religious, state, and economic leaders as well as by scientists through their general irresponsible actions, lies, and lies among their peoples. It must be well understood that we are not talking about the minority of all righteous and righteous people who do their praiseworthy duty in positions of leadership and protection of the people, because these do not fall within the scope of what the majority of the mistakes mentioned concern. This majority is first of all embodied by those who act irresponsibly as religious fritzes, state, security and world leaders and their followers, and secondly by the indoctrinated peoples and their powerful themselves, who as believers in torture, violence, authority, and religion are generally torn into the same whirlpool of irresponsibility as those who dictatorially lead themselves are caught up in it. Consequently, the nations act in the same way as their leaders and protectors. They then serve these leading and protecting people humbly, kneeling and submissively with their proclamations and hurry-rashes, with their high-handedness and praise, as well as with their fanatical and thoughtless elevation of their leaders. Power, military, authorities, religions, sects, scientific and economic leaders, etc. to human gods in every respect, even to the point of depravity. Since time immemorial, very many responsible people of the world have not been spared the shame and guilt for their crimes against their peoples, and even against all earthly mankind. Because since time immemorial they have failed again and still do so today. Responsible are above all those power-hungry officials, religious princes and their creeps, as well as the politicians, the authorities and their vassals, the military mighty and their henchmen, as well as those bribed or irresponsible scientists who let themselves be bought for false analyses or invent deadly poisons and warfare agents, who produce thoughtless and money-hungry economic quantities through their laboratories, poisons, and produce combat, weapon, and war material in their factories. All of them, precisely those who were in the aforementioned way faulty, or those who are today have been and still are, power-obsessed and money-hungry since time immemorial, who went over corpses and still do so today. They have all spoken great words since time immemorial and lulled their peoples with false promises, just as all the false leaders of the world continue to do today, so that they may be adored by their naive beggars. Even today, all these irresponsible people, of whom, of course, all righteous people are excluded and not addressed, lead the corresponding civil servants, religious princes and their lurkers, politicians, authorities and their vassals, the military dictators and their henchmen, scientists and economists. Great slimy words which they do not really mean seriously in their adolescence because they are truthfully not grown up, but conscientious. In truth, it is they who, through their positions of power and irresponsibility, drive the world and its peoples into need and misery as well as into wars, destruction and destruction, because they deceive and mislead the peoples with slimy speeches, because they never really mean anything seriously with their cheap lies of mercy, freedom, peace, and harmony, as well as of human rights, human dignity, compassion, and human responsibility. And it doesn't matter which country the guilty civil servants, religious princes and their fellow sneakers, as well as the powerful of the state and military dictators, scientists and economic kings are, because all of them move in the atmosphere of their roaring irresponsibility. There should never have been, and there should not be today. This precisely for many reasons of humanity, because, as since time immemorial, the acting, lying and doing of all the irresponsible people mentioned also in this day and age demands hundreds of thousands of human sacrifices, against which all righteous and responsible people in the same positions do not arrive, do nothing against, do nothing and cannot defend themselves. And even worse it became and is with the fact that as a result of the growing overpopulation more and more, Offspring of irresponsible people were trained from these in power positions, and also of all other kinds, and are being trained further. What let more and more similarly irresponsible people become evil and degenerate perpetrators, and will continue to do so in the future. The whole of human depravity, as it exists in the majority of mankind and in the aforementioned circles of the powerful, is neither an assertion of pure irrationality nor even madness, for everything is founded in effective facts which are calculated ice-coldly, and in this way continue to be calculated. So it is not as generally as the unrighteous of the mighty of all colors lie to the peoples, and even to all mankind, that everything is done for the good of all men, and is therefore based on humanity and reason. Truthfully, it is an outrageous lie that everything that the world's powerful of all kinds do for the individual human beings and for the entire world population is supposed to be uniquely humane and progressive in relation to the animal and all creatures. Truly, a lie without equal, because, as cynical as it sounds, in fact, unique in nature is only the human quality to be sycophantically humble, slimy and in bondage to the powerful of the world, as well as barbaric, murderous, annihilating, destructive, and exterminating against fellow human beings and all fellow creatures of nature and their fauna and flora. Physical and psychological cruelties and depravity are regarded by the majority of all illegitimate governmental powers and their vassals as a legitimate means of exercising power, as well as by the majority of people on Earth to achieve selfish ends. Nobody cares about the fact that many people are harmed by all sorts of violent psychological and physical machinations of their fellow human beings, as are many innocent citizens by false and negative orders, executions, actions, crooked corporate management, mobbing deeds and enforcement measures, etc. by civil servants, acquaintances, carers, teachers, employees, carers, directors, religious representatives, superiors, scientists, and economic powers. Intrigues, intrigue games, intrigue pieces, intrigues, bullying, plots, infiltrations, activities up to deception, as well as manipulations, pushings, bad moves, bad practices, tricks, gimmicks, scams, ruses, ploys, cheats, crooks, dodges, etc. of all kinds, belong to the daily use in the contact with each other long ago. In this regard, all the guilty and unrighteous power seekers of every color have also degenerated, as has that part of the majority of all mankind which cultivates this degeneracy, which is to be called civilization's absolute disgrace. There is no justification for this. No matter whether an authority, a state power, a religion, a political or secular ideology, an individual or the majority of a people or even mankind has laid the foundations for it. The worldwide practice of human depravity care, which must actually be called civilization depravity, is unfortunately not a daily topic for humanity on Earth, neither on television nor on the radio, nor in the so-called houses of God, in newspapers and magazines, etc., because strangely enough it prefers to get excited in masses in all sorts of media about football results and all sorts of other so-called sports, whereby many bring with their emissions climate-destroying effects, just like all kinds of motorsports. The depravity of the majority of those in power in states, religions, researchers, scientists, and economic powers, etc., is not reported and said any more than is the human army of millions of maltreated and maltreated people. On the other hand, all the media are full of reports of all kinds of crime and violent crimes, of pointless policies and their wrong decisions, as if they were effectively about the security and welfare of the citizen, the people, and the country. These include, for example, incorrect legislation, actions, deeds, and inadequate precautions against terrorism, serious crime, and crimes against life and limb. In this respect, perpetrators of these depravities are touched with velvet gloves as a result of unjustified false humanism of stupid and stupid false humanists and, if at all, sent on holiday behind Swedish curtains for a few years at the expense of the state, only to be released into society again. So no man can be surprised when in the whole world archaic and cruel machinations are still and constantly resorted to in order to deny existence in an asocial and murderous way and to lead a life beyond all justice, humanity, righteousness, and sociality. It is also these antisocial and inhuman people who surrender without hesitation or conscience in order to deceive their fellow human beings, to damage their belongings and even their bodies and lives, whereby they themselves do not shy away from torture of any kind. It makes no difference whether the torture is carried out in a purely private manner or by a state order as, for example, post-Stalinist by the Kim Jong-un dictatorship in North Korea, in African, Asian, Far Eastern, Oriental and South American states, or in the USA, which dare to boast of their democratic achievements, but which on the one hand practice the death penalty, but on the other hand specifically commission psychologists to invent new physical and psychological forms of torture. China and Russia should also be mentioned in this context, even though torture in these countries is more carried out in secret and therefore less known. And it must also be said that the religions are no better, and they were no better in the past of the last 2.5 millennia than they were in the present. For they too have been murdered and tortured, and in some places in the world it still happens today, albeit in altered and more perfidious forms, which are usually psychologically demolishing. The ruling world religions allegedly claim that they are committed to love, human love, charity and freedom as well as peace and harmony in every respect, and that they therefore act as supreme moral authorities for all their believers and unbelievers. But when all their efforts, works, and successes in this regard are considered, it can be seen that they have consistently failed miserably in everything. And what all these world religions and their sects have been guilty of since time immemorial is knocking the bottom out of every barrel, no matter how strong it may be. To name everything in this respect would fill many thick volumes. Therefore, only the inhuman and horrible machinations of the Catholic Inquisition with its torture, etc., are to be pointed out, which were probably surpassed in cruelty and inhumanity only by the machinations of the Nazi concentration camps and the war crimes of the USA in the World War of 1939 to 1945. And all this even happened deliberately, because the state leaders criminally called on and encouraged their military and murderous henchmen to do so. For this, several religious monks have also given their hands, consecrated weapons of war, and cheered the war and the massacres up to holy acts, and given their blessings. This has increased the number of victims and their torment, all of which has always been done so that the murderers could live a life particularly pleasing to God in the name of their God, and give their murdercraft a nimbus or prestige, a halo, a gloriole, and a glorious glory by serving the truth of faith, and performing good deeds. The whole thing is a terrible reflection, physical, psychological, and conscious, of a collective human depravity that corresponds no more and no less than a completely degenerated culture of refined human cruelty.
As usual, your words are striking the facts. But now I also have something to say that concerns your and the group members' security. Namely, in the relationship our people of friends, the Sonair, have made a lot of in more detail. It means that, however, this must be kept quiet, because nothing may penetrate to the outside. So about this.
But I'm sure it's a good thing if I can get Andreas and Bernadette.
I think so too, but they too should remain silent, and in general, because...
Sure, I understand.
Then I want to explain something to you that is connected with the last attack on you from September 2nd to September 3rd, when Daniel was also endangered. With the help of the Sonair, it will be possible in a short time that, in addition, however, we must give the instruction on our part that nothing should be made public in this respect. Not even in the KG, because certain members do not know how to remain silent, so that the whole thing would quickly be disseminated to the public, which would be absolutely not expedient.
That is not a problem, because I only inform Andreas and Bernadette, who, however, can remain silent. Besides, I'll just skip your explanation when I call up the interview report. And that I inform Andreas and Bernadette is, in my opinion, a necessity.
You know what to do. So I don't have to say anything else. But now I want to take up again the matter concerning the person of whom I have already spoken and who accuses you of lying about the contacts with us. It is also a fact that this person presents various other things differently than they correspond to the reality of reality and its truth. And he does this because he is confused in his world of thought and is no longer able to perceive facts correctly and consequently is neither able to grasp nor judge them realistically. Nevertheless, her slanderous claims are unforgivable and ungrateful, also because you stand by her helpfully, although you know how she doubts and defames you, your work, your help for her, and even the mission. But you are not the only one in her repertoire of obscene and untruthful insults. For in accusing you of lies and unfairness, this ungrateful person also insults far more than 120 witnesses with regard to their observations regarding sightings of our flying machines, opportunistic encounters with us, and observations which were in some way always connected with you and us. Especially Guido Moosbrugger. Bernadette and Jacobus are insulted by the same person and accused of lying, who, from the very beginning, were witnesses of observation and experience with regard to the encounters between you and us, as well as with regard to our aircraft and demonstrations.
I know all that, but that is no reason for me to repay evil with evil. Besides, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm more interested in what you think in general about the EU dictatorship and its internal structure.
It should be said that we Pleiarians deal with information in large circles and assess the internal structures that also have an external effect on the EU member states' populations. Our findings are that the dictatorial European Union has no form of identity whatsoever, and is therefore completely devoid of identity. This also has the effect that the EU dictatorship is very far away from the people or the individual peoples of the EU states. The fact that the European Union, which is controlled from Brussels, corresponds to an effective dictatorship, which of course lacks any form of democracy, plays an important role in this. It goes without saying that this also makes it clear that all leading EU elements as a whole are correspondingly obsessed with insatiable greed for power and do not tolerate any interference in their dictatorial craft. This also means that the EU powers are unyielding in all the demands they make towards the member states and also towards non-member states. For example, with regard to Switzerland, with regard to so-called reciprocal or bilateral agreements and treaties. It should also be mentioned that apart from Switzerland, which despite the existing agreements and treaties with the EU, still exists in a certain degree of EU-free freedom and politically good and secure order. Various of the direct EU member states are, however, severely impaired and even extremely unstable in terms of domestic policy, security, and order. The EU has brought no integrity or inviolability to the individual EU territories, no democracy or freedom, but only instability and hatred to various EU states, as well as the most serious financial problems, national debt, serious political problems, and dissatisfaction of the states and their peoples. That is little that I have to say, but there is certainly a certain picture to understand what the EU dictatorship is.
Fortunately, many Swiss people have so far had no interest in joining the dictatorship of the European Union, particularly the SVP and the Swiss People's Party, which is vehemently fighting against Switzerland's accession to the EU. Switzerland is a rich country, and the number of unemployed is very low in contrast to the EU dictatorship states, with Germany alone always slipping about 3 million unemployed. The Swiss people attach great importance to their national traditions and their self-determination, with many decisions being made in Switzerland through direct referendums. This contrasts with the EU dictatorship, which dictatorially determines everything in its sphere of power without a referendum. As a result, the countries of the European Union are bound by certain EU dictatorship laws, which are laid down by the power-hungry EU powers and by the so-called EU Parliament. For member states, this sometimes also means that regulations must be enforced in their country, even though the majority of citizens reject them and then suffer from the effects of the law, as has been the case since time immemorial everywhere where dictatorships ruled and continue to rule. The poor or poorer countries, which stupidly and greedily join the EU for hoped-for profit and profit, whereby profit and profit are, unfortunately, in the foreground of all the stupid and stupid of rulers and peoples, hope for more prosperity. Although paradoxically they fear the inevitable increase in prices for all goods, as well as high taxes and disadvantages for their private sector, as well as in their own national economy. And we must not forget the process of progressive globalization, through which nature and its fauna and flora change negatively. Plants and animals are displaced and even exterminated by foreign invaders, while large corporations gain influence in small businesses. Retailers, horticulturists, and farmers are under increasing competitive pressure and have to give up their craft and their existence, as is the case with numerous small farmers in particular. Many people emigrate from poorer EU countries to more prosperous ones, as well as millions of refugees, or those who pretend to be refugees, from Africa, Arabia, and the Middle and Far East to Europe and especially to the EU, fleeing from one dictatorship to another to find work or earn more money than they can in their own countries. This while other wealthy refugees are only fleeing because they hope that the stupid Europeans will endure them and make them even wealthier. It is also a fact that such genuine refugees, as well as false refugees who are nothing more than tourists of prosperity and refugees, are employed for many activities rather than own citizens, because they are willing to work as refugees or fictitious refugees, for significantly lower wages. And as a rule, they earn more money with it than in their country. Others, real refugees, however, are happy to get any work at all. This development naturally increases the gap between the poor, poorer, and rich states of the EU dictatorship. And the bad thing about it is that it also prevents the EU countries from being brought into line on a uniform level, while the powerful of the direct EU dictatorship leading states can swim absolutely on top and tyrannize the poor, poorer and lesser members. Above all, figures such as the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who in her pathological delusion has caused a refugee catastrophe to befall the EU, which also affects Switzerland. In addition, the EU dictatorship is paying less and less attention to environmental protection and the protection of plants and animals. But there are also more and more mass livestock farms in which many animals, as well as many animals and poultry, are fattened, tortured, and kept in the most confined space under unbelievable torment. Slaughter cattle, slaughter animals, and slaughter poultry are today often transported across Europe for cost reasons, whereby they have to endure hours of constricted journeys without food and water, whereby various die from exhaustion or are trampled to death by panic-stricken conspecifics. Moreover, many sectors of the economy no longer produce at all in Europe, but in cheaper working countries such as the former Eastern Bloc countries, China, India, and Pakistan, etc., where countless people live below the poverty line. These many people, poor as a mouse, work there for a starvation wage and also under inhumane conditions. In many cases, it is not even adults, but children, who are even sold off as slaves by traffickers to factories and plantations, etc. In the EU dictatorship states, the so-called outsourcing of work abroad benefits large corporations in particular, which continue to expand their companies and become more powerful, while smaller companies are no longer competitive and have to give up because they collapse financially. The whole thing also has the consequence that the rich states in Europe, that is to say the rich EU dictatorship states, on the one hand distinguish themselves from their poor and poorer member states, but also from all other poor and poorer states in the world, such as the countries of Africa and Asia, etc. This, while the controls between the EU member states fall, and the borders to the non-EU states are all the more secured. But this is an evil factor, which has very bad consequences for many real refugees, who have to flee their homeland as a result of, and in danger of, life and misery. In the past, they could apply for asylum in various EU dictatorship states. They are now denied that because it is now only possible to apply for asylum in one country. But this is hard for real refugees, because if they are denied asylum, they will have to leave the EU dictatorship, as the EU dictatorship countries argue, because they cannot accept more immigrants, because otherwise their own prosperity and the stability of the state would be endangered. So, in this case, there are many genuine refugees and not economic refugees or economic refugee tourists, but effectively suffering people fleeing their homeland as a result of intolerable poverty, unemployment, dictatorship, hunger, wars, and political persecution. The EU dictatorship states are now sealing themselves off from the outside world and closing their borders as a result of the great Merkel refugee madness. As a result, however, many desperate genuine refugees try to immigrate illegally to an EU dictatorship country without knowing that they are only exchanging one dictatorship with another, unless they can enter Switzerland with permission or without permission. Illegal migrants or forbidden immigrants to a country are always a big problem, because these refugees or refugees, false refugees, manage to live hidden on the edge of existence. In many cases, they accept underpaid illegal work, which is also extremely dubious and risky. And they don't care that they take the work away from local unemployed people and that they can't earn a living with it. Others of the illegals steal, trade drugs, or otherwise become delinquent, all just to survive. They all have no health and accident insurance, cannot afford medical help, and live in constant fear of being discovered and expelled. Already at the moment of their departure, these people, the real refugees, take on great hardships and risks, because they usually have to make ends meet without the help of smugglers, precisely because they have little or no financial means at their disposal. But with the wealthy and false refugees, they have many thousands of dollars and euros. So they turn to smuggling organizations that offer them horrendous sums of money to take them secretly across borders. Many genuine refugees see a chance for a better life in a flight from their homeland to an industrial country or to another rich state. However, many of these genuine refugees do not receive entry permits, so they see their only way to get illegally to another and better country in order to escape the terrible conditions of their own country. However, it is the case that many, like the Africans, Syrians, and Iraqis, are therefore trying to reach the rich EU dictatorship or Switzerland via the Mediterranean. But again and again it happens that their scrap-ripe boats sink, and not infrequently dozens or even hundreds of several hundred people drown. And the fact that the prosperity gap between the rich EU dictatorship states and their poorer and poorer member states, as well as the foreign states of Africa, Arabia, and Asia, is constantly widening is clear and unavoidable.
What you say corresponds to what is given. But now, dear friend, I would like to discuss the following in a private way with you.